One night, three nations attacked, the world changed. Between 11:47 p.m. and 4:23 a.m. Gulf time, Iran executed a coordinated military operation that struck American, Israeli, and French forces simultaneously. Not proxy attacks through deniable militias. Not harassment operations that could be downplayed or dismissed. Direct Iranian military action against three Western nations in a single operational window. Here's what happened. 11:47 p.m., a U.S. Air Force KC-135 Stratotanker aircraft, callsign Shell 71, was conducting aerial refueling operations over the Gulf of Oman. The aircraft was supporting F-15E Strike Eagles returning from a combat air patrol near Iranian airspace. Without warning, the KC-135 was struck by what preliminary analysis identifies as a surface-to-air missile launched from Iranian territory. 7 American airmen gone. The aircraft broke apart at 28,000 feet. Debris scattered across 40 square miles of ocean. No survivors. 12:34 a.m., a barrage of ballistic missiles crossed into Israeli airspace from Iranian territory. 12 Fatah hypersonic missiles targeting military installations in the Negev desert. The Arrow 3 system engaged but could not intercept all targets. 3 missiles struck near Nevatim Air Base. Damage assessment ongoing. Israeli casualties confirmed but numbers not yet released. 3:15 a.m. A French naval detachment operating from a forward position in the United Arab Emirates came under attack. Cruise missiles, likely Sumar variants, struck the facility housing French sailors and Marines supporting Gulf security operations. 1 French sailor killed, 4 wounded. The first French military combat death in the Middle East since Mali operations in 2022. 3 attacks, 3 hours, 3 NATO member nations plus Israel. And here's the detail that has Washington, Paris, and Brussels in emergency session right now. The attacks were synchronized, not random, not opportunistic. The timing, the targeting, the weapon selection all indicate central planning and coordinated execution. Iran didn't stumble into attacking 3 nations. Iran chose to attack 3 nations simultaneously. The message is unmistakable. If you're allied with America, you're a target. If you operate in the Gulf region, you're vulnerable. If you've participated in any action Iran deems hostile, you will be hit when Iran decides to hit you. One night just redefined what this conflict is. It's no longer Iran versus America, it's Iran versus the Western Alliance. And that changes everything about how the next 72 hours unfold. Let me walk through each attack in detail because the specifics reveal something important about Iranian capabilities and intent. The KC-135 shootdown. The aircraft was operating at 28,000 feet, approximately 75 kilometers from Iranian airspace. That's international airspace. The aircraft was not over Iran. It was not approaching Iran. It was conducting routine refueling operations that have occurred thousands of times over the past 20 years. The missile that struck the tanker appears to be a variant of the Sayyad-4 air defense missile, potentially the extended range version that Iran has been developing but had never used in combat. The engagement envelope suggests a maximum range of approximately 200 kilometers, which means the missile was launched from well inside Iranian territory against an aircraft that posed no immediate threat. This wasn't self-defense. This was targeted assassination of an American military aircraft, 7 crew members. The pilot and co-pilot, both experienced officers with multiple combat deployments. The boom operator, who was likely mid-refueling when the missile struck. The loadmaster, 3 additional crew members supporting extended operations. Their names haven't been released pending family notification. But their deaths represent the first American military personnel killed by direct Iranian military action since the 1988 incidents in the Persian Gulf. The Israeli strike. 12 Fatah missiles launched from central Iran, trajectory indicating targets in southern Israel. The attack came during nighttime hours when base activity would be minimal, suggesting Iran was targeting infrastructure rather than maximizing casualties. The Arrow 3 system engaged at long range. 9 missiles were intercepted. 3 reached their targets. The damage at Nevatim is still being assessed, but satellite imagery shows crater impacts on the eastern runway and possible damage to aircraft shelters. This is the same base that houses Israeli F-35I Adir stealth fighters. Whether any aircraft were destroyed is not yet confirmed. Israeli casualties include military personnel who were on duty during the strike. The numbers have not been released, but Israeli media is reporting multiple deaths. In Israeli security culture, that typically means 3 or more. The French attack. The French naval detachment was operating from a facility in Fujairah, UAE, supporting French participation in the combined maritime forces that patrol Gulf waters. The facility housed approximately 120 French military personnel, primarily sailors and Marines. 3 cruise missiles struck the compound. The missiles appear to have used terrain-following flight paths that brought them across Omani airspace before turning north toward the UAE coast. The attack caught base defense systems off guard because the approach vector was unexpected. One sailor, identified as Maître Principal Jean-Baptiste Moreau, 34 years old, was killed when a missile struck the communications building where he was on duty. 4 others were wounded, 2 critically. France has not suffered a combat death from state-on-state action since the Algerian War ended in 1962. This changes France's relationship to the conflict fundamentally, but the attacks themselves, as devastating as they are, aren't even the most significant development of the last 12 hours. Because what happened after the attacks reveals that Iran was prepared for this moment in ways that suggest planning extending back months. Iran released a statement at 5:30 a.m. Tehran time, not a denial, not an excuse, a justification. The Islamic Republic of Iran has conducted defensive operations against military forces of aggressor nations operating in violation of regional sovereignty. These operations were necessary and proportional responses to ongoing hostile actions against Iranian interests. Additional responses remain prepared should aggression continue. 3 elements of that statement matter. First, aggressor nations. Plural. Iran is framing all 3 attacks as part of a single defensive response. They're not treating America, Israel, and France as separate conflicts. They're treating the Western alliance as a unified, hostile bloc. Second, necessary and proportional. Iran is claiming legal justification under self-defense provisions of international law. They're positioning the attacks not as escalation, but as response. The framing matters for how neutral nations perceive the conflict. Third, additional responses remain prepared. That's not a vague threat. That's a specific declaration that more attacks are staged and ready. The strike packages are prepared, the targets are selected, the weapons are in position. Iran didn't fire everything in one night. Iran demonstrated capability while holding capacity in reserve. And here's what's happening diplomatically. France has invoked NATO Article 4 consultation. Article 4 is the preliminary step before Article 5 collective defense. It requires all NATO members to consult when a member believes its territorial integrity, political independence, or security is threatened. This is the first Article 4 consultation triggered by an attack from Iran. Previous invocations have involved Russia, Turkey's conflicts, and COVID-19 logistics. This is new territory. The consultation doesn't automatically trigger collective response, but it puts the entire NATO alliance on notice that a member state considers itself under attack. The pressure on other NATO nations to respond collectively is enormous. Germany has called emergency cabinet meetings. The UK has summoned the Iranian ambassador. Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands have issued statements of solidarity with France. The European Union, which was attempting to maintain a separate diplomatic track with Iran, is now facing pressure to align with American and French positions. The neutrality that allowed European companies to continue limited business with Iran is collapsing. One night of Iranian attacks has united the Western alliance in ways that years of American pressure could not achieve. But unity isn't the same as strategy, and the question NATO faces is the same question America faces. What do you actually do in response? Let's talk about what's happening across Western capitals right now, because the decision-making processes triggered by last night's attacks are more chaotic than public statements suggest. Washington, the National Security Council has been in continuous session since word of the KC-135 shootdown reached the White House. The president was woken at 3:17 a.m. Eastern Time. He has not made a public appearance since. The Pentagon is operating at DEFCON 3 for forces in the Middle East. That's elevated readiness, one step below the level that preceded both Gulf Wars. Aircraft are being dispersed, ships are maneuvering, defensive systems are at maximum alert. But the response options being discussed reportedly range across a spectrum that suggests no consensus has emerged. At one end, immediate retaliatory strikes against the missile battery that shot down the KC-135 and associated air defense command nodes. Proportional response, tit for tat. At the other end, comprehensive strikes against Iranian military infrastructure, accepting that Iran will escalate further, but calculating that American firepower can achieve decisive degradation before Iranian response capacity is exhausted. The middle options involve various combinations of strikes, sanctions intensification, and diplomatic pressure designed to create space for de-escalation without appearing weak. None of the options have consensus. The meeting is ongoing. Paris. President Macron convened a defense council within an hour of learning of the French casualty. French military doctrine is clear about responding to attacks that kill French service members. Inaction is politically impossible, but France faces constraints America doesn't. French forces in the Gulf are limited. French power projection capability is primarily focused on Africa, where ongoing operations consume most available resources. The Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier is currently in maintenance and unavailable for deployment. France is consulting with NATO allies about burden sharing. The subtext: France will participate in retaliation but wants American forces to carry the primary load. London. The UK, which has forces in Bahrain and Oman, is operating at elevated alert, but has not been directly attacked. British officials are reportedly cautioning both Washington and Paris against immediate escalation. The British calculation is that last night's attacks, while devastating, may represent a peak rather than a beginning. Iran has demonstrated capability. Perhaps that demonstration is sufficient for Iranian strategic purposes. Perhaps de-escalation is possible. This analysis is not shared in Washington or Paris. The disagreement is reportedly creating tension in traditionally close relationships. Tel Aviv. Israel has not yet responded militarily. The Security Cabinet is meeting continuously. But Israeli doctrine typically demands response within 24 to 48 hours of any attack. The constraint is coordination. Israel wants American support for whatever response it launches. That support may not be available if American forces are busy with their own retaliation. The sequencing of responses is being negotiated in real time between Washington and Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, in Iran, the Iranian government has gone into defensive posture. Key officials have relocated from known positions. Military assets are dispersing to secondary locations. The population is being prepared through state media for possible Western attacks. But there's no indication of surrender, no offer to negotiate, no diplomatic outreach through back channels that might suggest willingness to de-escalate. Iran appears to be preparing for the next phase rather than seeking an exit from this phase. Let's be honest about why last night changes the strategic landscape, because the significance extends far beyond the immediate military damage. For years, the assumption governing this conflict was calibration. Each side would carefully limit its actions to avoid triggering responses that couldn't be controlled. Proxy attacks rather than direct attacks. Harassment rather than destruction. Signals rather than statements. Last night, Iran abandoned calibration entirely. Attacking America, Israel, and France in a single night isn't proportional response. It isn't carefully limited signaling. It's a declaration that Iran is willing to fight the entire Western alliance simultaneously. The question everyone is asking, why now? Several theories are circulating. Theory 1. Iranian intelligence concluded that American retaliation was imminent regardless of Iranian action. If you're going to be attacked anyway, strike first to degrade enemy capability before the response arrives. Theory 2. Internal Iranian politics required a dramatic demonstration of strength. Economic pressure from sanctions, social unrest from domestic protests, and factional struggles within the regime created demand for action that unified the population against external enemies. Theory 3. Iran has calculated that Western alliance solidarity is a facade, that France won't actually go to war over one dead sailor, that European economic interests will reassert themselves over military commitments, that if Iran demonstrates enough capability, the alliance will fracture. Theory 4. This is the opening move of a strategy designed to end American presence in the Middle East permanently. The attacks continue until American forces withdraw or are destroyed. Iran is prepared for years of conflict. Each theory suggests different implications for what comes next. If Theory 1 is correct, Iranian attacks may pause while they assess whether the first strike advantage was sufficient. If Theory 2, the attacks were politically necessary but strategically optional, creating space for negotiation. If Theory 3, Iran will test alliance solidarity by continuing attacks and watching for fractures. If Theory 4, this is the beginning of an extended war with no off-ramps. Intelligence analysts don't know which theory is correct. Probably neither do Iran's own leaders, who may have mixed motivations and unclear strategic objectives. Here's what we do know. The attacks have crossed thresholds that make de-escalation extremely difficult. 7 dead Americans requires American response. That's not politics. That's institutional necessity. The military cannot accept the death of its personnel without visible action, or deterrence collapses globally. 1 dead French sailor requires French response. France has sustained casualties in African operations without this level of reaction, but those casualties came from non-state actors. State-on-state killing is different. Israeli casualties require Israeli response. This isn't even a question. Israel will strike Iran. The only questions are what, when, and how hard. 3 nations are now committed to military response. Coordinating those responses, ensuring they don't conflict or escalate in unintended ways, managing the aftermath. These are challenges the alliance hasn't faced since 2003 at latest. and Iran is promising more attacks if the response comes. The escalation spiral that everyone feared has begun. One night triggered it. Nobody knows how many nights it takes to stop it. So let's be absolutely clear about what happened in one night and what it means. 11:47 p.m., Iran shot down a U.S. Air Force KC-135 tanker aircraft over the Gulf of Oman. 7 American military personnel killed. The first direct Iranian military killing of American service members in over 35 years. 12:34 a.m. Iran launched 12 Fatah hypersonic missiles at Israeli military installations, 9 intercepted, 3 struck near Nevatim Air Base. Israeli casualties confirmed, but numbers not released. 3:15 a.m., Iranian cruise missiles struck a French naval facility in the UAE. 1 French sailor killed, 4 wounded, the first French combat death from state action since 1962. 3 attacks, 3 nations, 3 hours. Iran has released a statement claiming defensive justification and promising additional attacks if Western aggression continues. No de-escalation offer, no diplomatic outreach, preparation for continued conflict. France has invoked NATO Article 4 consultation, putting the entire alliance on notice. Emergency sessions are ongoing across European capitals. Alliance solidarity is being tested. The United States is operating at DEFCON 3 for Middle East forces. Response options are being debated. Immediate retaliation versus comprehensive campaign. No consensus yet. Israel's security cabinet is meeting continuously. Israeli doctrine requires response within 48 hours. Coordination with American forces is ongoing. 3 Western nations are now committed to military response against Iran. The sequencing, scope, and coordination of those responses remain uncertain. The escalation risks of uncoordinated retaliation are severe. Iran is dispersing forces and preparing for Western strikes. No indication of willingness to negotiate. The regime appears committed to continued confrontation. The calibrated conflict that both sides maintained for years ended last night. Iran abandoned limits. The West must now decide whether to respond with limits or abandon them as well. Escalation spiral or decisive victory are the options being presented. There is no middle ground that anyone has identified. One night. 7 Americans dead, 1 Frenchman dead, unknown Israelis dead, 3 nations attacked, NATO consulting. War closer than at any point since 1991. The world woke up this morning different than it went to sleep last night. Pay attention to official announcements over the next 24 hours. Pay attention to military movements. Pay attention to alliance coordination and alliance fractures, because last night was the night everything changed. And nobody knows yet whether it changed toward war that ends or war that expands. 3 attacks, one night. The world shook. It hasn't stopped shaking yet.